more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Mr. Khaled Dawood, managing editor at Al Ahram Weekly, and from Washington by Mr. Newman, Abuissa, political analyst on U.S. affairs. Welcome, gentlemen, to Q News. I will start with you, Mr. Dawood. Now, given that the UN Security Council vote on Resolution 2803 endorsed a U.S. plan to deploy an international stabilization force in Gaza and, of course, to establish a transitional authority, how do you assess the immediate political implications inside the Gaza Strip for the local governance structures?
Well, thank you, Hala, for having me. I think we're still a bit ahead of reaching this point of government structures in the Palestinian territories, because we need to wait first for the formation of the Board of Peace, which is going to be, as you mentioned, chaired by President Donald Trump, but it will also include other leaders from all over the world who are involved in the conflict between Palestine and Israel and the dire situation in Gaza. So probably we're still a few weeks away, at least until the stabilization, until the Board of Peace is formed, until they meet and they agree on the formation of the stabilization force, and then the structure of the transitional Palestinian government that will be coordinating and cooperating with the Board of Peace and arranging all the future steps with that newly created body. So as the U.S. envoy to the United Nations, Mr. Mike Waltz, stated in his speech after the approval of the Security Council resolution, that this is only a beginning, and we still have actually a lot of work ahead, a lot of ambiguities, as you've mentioned, about the mandate of the International Stabilization Force, the composition of this stabilization force, which countries are going to be willing to contribute troops, and the mandate of this force, because that's a very controversial point, as you know, Hala. Yes. I mean, Israel, of course, is always highlighting the aspect about disarmament of Hamas, but again, the International Stabilization Force is mainly concerned as well about the protection of Palestinian civilians and the providing of aid. So nobody, actually, no country in the world, whatever name it is going to be willing to turn into an occupation force in Gaza and to do Israel's dirty work. So these are all very complicated issues that will continue, that needs the continued personal commitment of U.S. President Donald Trump and his top envoys, so that we can make this a success. There are a lot of open question marks, and only steps on the ground and the behavior of the current extremist Israeli government is going to determine the future. And one last point, Hala, is that we've already seen, before the approval of the resolution and after the approval of the resolution, statements being made by Netanyahu and his top ministers, the extremist ministers such as Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and even the defense minister Israel Katz, that they will not allow under any condition the establishment of a Palestinian state. And that goes contrary to the very mild reference in that resolution and in the plan to a path towards the statehood. But even that mild reference led the Israeli government to declare in advance they will not respect this newly approved resolution.
Yes. Mr. Abuissa, now the resolution passed with 13 votes in favor and abstentions from Russia and China. How significant is this voting pattern for the legitimacy of the resolution and, of course, for the future implementation?
Greetings in the beginning. Yes, this resolution passed without Russia. Russia has its own resolution, and they were trying to bypass the American resolution, but there was not enough support for the Russian resolutions, and the American resolutions has passed, even though the objectives of the different sides are very different till today. For example, Israel does not want a Palestinian state, and they want to achieve through this resolution and through the second stage of the peace agreement what they couldn't achieve during the war by eliminating the force of Hamas on the ground. And the Palestinian people wants to have a end to the genocide which was going on. And we know that many other, like the United States, wants this resolution to basically quiet the situation down, versus Saudi Arabia wants a path to peace, to contribute money to the rebuilding of Gaza. And we have many different objectives from many different parties, but they all agreed that we need something to agree on to basically quiet down the area, because it's been a hot flash area for the whole world, and the whole globe is focused on the Gaza Strip, and they don't want that to continue. So they are
Yes.
trying to limit this area as much as possible, even though the details of this agreement are not clear yet, because there are as many objectives from many different
Yes,
parties.
but Mr. Abuissa, Russia and China abstained, saying that the resolution does not give the UN a clear role in the future of Gaza. How do you read that?
It absolutely does not give a clear vision, because the Palestinians were not party to this agreement, and they are not going to abide by this agreement. And even Netanyahu, he agreed to this agreement only in English. He couldn't agree to it in Hebrew in front of his audience. So the different parties are having different objectives, and that's what China is concerned about. That there is a possibility, a strong possibility, that this agreement will break down and a war will break up one more time.
Mr. Dawood, the resolution also mentions a, I quote and unquote, credible pathway to Palestinian statehood, though it's vague and ambiguous. So what does this wording tell us about the international community's commitment, and what are the pitfalls here?
Well, I mean, we need to differentiate between the international commitment and the American commitment, because, I mean, if you're going to judge Hala by the international commitment, we already have close to 160 world countries that have declared that they recognize the Palestinian state. The problem continues to lie with the U.S. Administration's consecutive ones, not just the Trump one, but even the Biden administration, although it had a more friendly language towards the ambitions and the rights of the Palestinian people, but still the Biden administration could not take this step, or even the Obama administration, they could not take this step towards the recognition of the Palestinian state. But you are right. I mean, the reference is very vague, very long term, and it's like, even the wording is like, that after the Palestinian Authority carries certain reforms that have been detailed in the so-called New York Declaration made by Saudi Arabia and France, this may, and I want to stress the word may, open the door for recognizing Palestinian right to self-determination and Palestinian statehood. And that's why we had this abstention from Russia and China. But obviously, Hala, I mean, no one wanted to kind of make U.S. President Donald Trump angry. Russia has a lot of interests with the Americans, of course, over the issue of Ukraine. So had they vetoed the resolution, this would have been a kind of an insult to the U.S. president. We also know about the detailed trade talks between China and the United States, a lot of common interest between the two of them. So probably they resorted to this option of abstaining, while noting, of course, both of them, as well as the Algerian representative to the Security Council, that upon the request of the Arab countries that met with Trump, we're talking about Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, Jordan, Pakistan, that those countries, they have approved, and the Palestinian Authority, actually, Hala, I mean, they have all approved the new UN Security Council resolution. So it was very difficult, despite all reservations, to say that Russia and China will veto that resolution. And of course, that lays a lot of responsibility on those 8 Arab and Muslim countries that have agreed to be partners with Trump. I mean, the countries I mentioned, along with Turkey, they are the only guarantees, to be honest, that the plan will even proceed, because, as you know, I mean, the Israelis do not even want to carry the second stage of withdrawal from within the Gaza Strip. So this will require a lot of pressure from the Arab and Muslim nations to remind Trump that the plan, or even the Security Council resolution, needs to be implemented in its entirety, and not just the parts that satisfy Israel in terms of demilitarization, disarmament, and like all the other steps in relation to Israeli security, because Palestinian people have rights as well.
Exactly.
It's not only the interest of Israel that needs always to be highlighted and taken care of.
Exactly. Mr. Abuissa, the Board of Peace proposed in the resolution appears to be shared by the U.S. and almost outside the UN's usual system. What does this say about multilateralism and the UN's role in this process?
This is a new role in the Middle East. This United Nations has not had a active role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and Israel does not want the United Nations to be interfering in its affairs. They are trying to keep the control for the Israeli by themselves. However, the Israelis were not able to reach an agreement with the Hamas on their own or try to eliminate Hamas at all. So they were obliged by President Trump to go to an international agreement, and that is now what is going on. There are possibility of having international force to come to Gaza, and Israel is objecting to any Turkish or Pakistani troops in the Gaza Strip to keep the peace, and they are also objecting for the Palestinian Authority to be in control of the Gaza Strip. So they do have many objectives. They've tried to divide the Gaza Strip from the West Bank in the past. They've tried to control it by themselves, and they failed at some levels. And now they are trying to win what they couldn't win with their own forces on the negotiating table. So there is lots of loose ends at this point, and Israel is going to try to take advantage of those vague points, and that's what we are seeing today. There will be a lot of maneuvering from many parties participating in this here, because it is important for many countries for this conflict to end, and there is no clear end for this conflict, and that's what we are seeing today.
Yes, and of course, Hamas's rejection is a very important point. I would take it to Mr. Dawood. Mr. Dawood, Hamas rejected the resolution, saying that it bypasses Palestinian will and imposes external control. How does this rejection impact the feasibility of forming a governing structure that can function on the ground?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, let me remind you, Hala, that Hamas, approved the Trump plan upon its declaration. And
at an earlier stage.
And the Europeans and like many other parties have approved already this Trump plan when it was declared officially and signed in Sharm el-Sheikh. Exactly. So I guess for Hamas to come now and to say that they reject this resolution is kind of an expression of dissatisfaction about the lack of clarity about the future of the Gaza Strip and the relationship to the West Bank and the future of establishing a Palestinian state. But I don't think that they will not cooperate with countries that are playing the role of the guarantors, especially I'm referring to Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, that they will have some role in pressing the American and the Israeli side in carrying out their part of the obligations. And let's not forget here, Hannah, that yes, indeed, the UN Security Council did approve the Trump plan and gave it its endorsement, but the International Stabilization Force and the Board of Peace are not actually UN mandated bodies. These are, the force is going to be a US-led force, and after a lot of pressure from China and from Russia and other Arab countries, they created a link between that the new Board of Peace and the Security Council by asking the Board of Peace to provide a report once every 6 months. But this is not a UN mission. This is an approval,
a US-led mission. You can say that
for an American plan, and I don't think that Hamas, at this point at least, will oppose on the ground the upcoming steps, except if some very terrible scenarios take place, such as the one that are being circulated actually by Mr. Jared Kushner, who is President Trump's envoy to the region, and his son-in-law, by saying that reconstruction will only take place in the areas of Gaza that are under control of Israel, which, as you mentioned, something like 53% of the Gaza Strip, which is, of course, ridiculous and nonsense, because 2 million Palestinians are concentrated in the areas that are now, behind the so-called yellow line, the imaginary yellow line that Israel has created. And there is no kind of, rationale at all that the people who need aid most are going to wait for 2 years until Mr. Jared Kushner and his supporters within the Israeli government create new communities in Rafah or in other parts. Because, again, after 2 years of this horrible genocide war, it's unimaginable that the Palestinians who live currently in the 50% controlled by Hamas will agree voluntarily to move to live under Israeli occupation. This notion, and this is one point that's extremely worrying to me, to be honest, Hala, that this notion by President Trump and his own son-in-law, Mr. Jared Kushner, that Palestinians can be offered financial incentives, living condition incentives to give up their desire to build their own state and to gain the right to self-determination, is a very faulty premise that we have tried before in this region, dating back to the Oslo Accords and the former Israeli late Prime Minister Shimon Peres, who promised a new Middle East, but the continuation of the Israeli racist occupation of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem is the reason why we continue to see Palestinian resistance, and that's not going to disappear if the entire purpose of the American plan is to build new communities and to make money out of it.
Exactly. This is indeed a point that raises so many uncertainties. But I will go back to Mr. Abuissa. Now, Mr. Abuissa, the text says that only after the Palestinian Authority completes a reform program and reconstruction advances will a credible pathway to a statehood open. Does this conditionality risk delaying Palestinian self-determination indefinitely?
It does in many ways. It's very vague, and they are not going to agree to the Palestinian Authority now. It's been in without election for a long time, and it's very hard to hold elections under the occupation. And that's the rules are obliged by Israel. Israel is putting all those restrictions on the Palestinian Authority, and they don't want the Palestinian Authority to have any kind of role in the Gaza Strip, and they want to keep the separation between the two entities in the West Bank and the Gaza, and that's why they put this kind of clause in the agreement that the Palestinian Authority have to reform. What kind of reform? No, they did not say what kind of reform. How is it reformed? Is also when the Palestinians elected Hamas, for example, in Gaza, that was not a good reform. That was not a good election because they don't want the results of that election. The same thing might happen also with the Palestinian Authority. If they elected the wrong leadership, then they are going to object to that kind of leadership. So they want a specific people who can work with Israel and who are willing to implement Israel's plans on the ground. And that is impossible, especially now the Palestinians are not going to agree to an outside agency trying to rule them. They are one of the most educated people in the Arab world, and they are more than able to rule themselves, and they want to rule themselves as has been stated at many times. And that is the issue between Israel and the Palestinians. The Palestinians are not going to be having their own leadership, and Israel is not going to agree to that, and there will be the conflict to continue on for the time being. Hopefully it will not break into another war.
Hopefully. Mr. Dawood, now the plan envisages an international stabilization force, yet so far no clear list of participating countries, no operational mechanism has been announced. So what are the main obstacles that you see for creating that force and making it effective?
Well, first of all, the board of peace has to be formed. I mean, other than President Donald Trump, we're not even sure about the components of the so-called board of peace or the kind of discussions that will take place. But as I've mentioned, and I've been reading many reports that the Americans originally wanted not just an Islamic and Arab force, but they also wanted European troops to be involved, British, French, Italian. But so far, everybody's worried about the mandate of this international stabilization force because, I mean, and we've heard the King of Jordan saying that this is, this is going to be a force which aim is, to maintain the peace and not to enforce measures against the Palestinian people as the Israelis want. I mean, and even, of course, the German troops or the British troops or even Italian troops, nobody wants to get into a confrontation with the Palestinian people themselves in case they carry out the mission which Israel believes is their only mission about the demilitarization and the disarmament. And this has to be a Palestinian-led process. This is supposed to be a process that's aimed at helping the Palestinian people make their own government and connect the Gaza Strip to the West Bank and the return of the Palestinian Authority to the Gaza Strip, which are all points mentioned in the Trump plan. But the problem is that the lack of the deadlines, the lack of a timetable for the implementation of those steps. And of course, the main fear, to be honest, Hala, is that nobody believes that the current Israeli government led by Netanyahu, and including some of his most racist ministers such as Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, would ever be satisfied with the peaceful situation in Gaza or progress towards a Palestinian state, especially in an Israeli election year. I mean, again, Netanyahu thrives
buying time here? Do you think that we're buying time here, sir? Or the Israeli government is just buying time until the elections are over?
Well, I'm not sure about, that the situation on the ground in Gaza can sustain waiting until the elections are over, because let's not forget, Hala, the humanitarian situation in Palestine is catastrophic.
Exactly.
It's disastrous. All those millions of people who are living in tents during the winter season, the Israelis, as usual, they have been using the food and the medicine as bargaining chips over the issue of the release of the remaining Israeli bodies that are being kept in Gaza. Now we're talking about 3 only. We're talking about 2 Israelis and 1 national from Thailand. So right now, after getting done with this issue of retrieving the bodies of the Israeli hostages, the Israeli government, Netanyahu, is going to come up with this claim about the disarmament of Hamas, and we will not carry any further withdrawals until Hamas disarms, until Hamas demilitarizes. I mean, these are all fears that the Israeli government will not miss an opportunity to, basically fail this Trump plan and get back to the situation of war, which always serves the interests of the Israeli prime minister. But again, let me remind you, Hala, of the statements that were being made by Trump, that his vision of the Middle East is not limited to Gaza, that obviously we've seen him receiving the Syrian president in Washington last week. We've seen him yesterday receiving the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and there's a lot of involvement in the issue of Lebanon. So, I mean, again, I think Trump's and his ambitions for billions, if not trillions of dollars coming in investments will not happen, will not take place if he did not put enough pressure on the Israeli government to respect the entirety of his plan and not just talk about Israeli needs and Israeli fears.
Mr. Abuissa, finally, given the competing agendas of the United States, Israel, and Palestinian factions, do you see that resolution 2803 creating a unified political track for Gaza?
It will provide some platform to move forward at some levels. However, it will not be a final resolution. There will be many forces try to keep this agreement on track from the United States of America, even though the United States will not be paying for the rebuilding of Gaza, but the United States wants to be on the, President Trump specifically wants to be on top of the pyramid of rebuilding Gaza, and he wants the Gulf state monies coming to Gaza to rebuild Gaza and have some American companies benefit from that rebuilding. So there will be a push for rebuilding, and there is enough interest from many countries around the globe to participate in this agreement to keep it moving forward. And that's what is going to be happening now. We saw lots of political activities in the last week or so, and we will see a lot more activities happening from Europe and elsewhere in the globe toward a resolution of this conflict. And then Israel is going to try to resist the international interference in its affairs with the Palestinians. However, Israel has failed to resolve the issue, and there will be a global push to continue the rebuilding of Gaza and to continue to put pressure on Israel and the Palestinians to move forward on those fronts.
Well, that was Mr. Newman Abuissa, political analyst on U.S. Affairs. Thank you so much, sir. And Mr. Khaled Dawood, managing editor at Al Ahram Weekly. Thank you so much. Thank you both for your valuable insights.